In the quiet suburb of Aspen Hills, they were the perfect paradigm. Emma and Mark, a happily married couple with a beautiful home, thriving careers, and seemingly unbreakable love. Emma was beloved by everyone, her friends, neighbors, and even Mark's colleagues. In their eyes, she was sweet, compassionate, and endlessly supportive. The kind of woman who would bake treats for the community on weekends and organize local charity fundraisers. But beneath this facade, there hid a secret so dark and so meticulously hidden that even those closest to her could not imagine it. On a crisp autumn morning, Mark felt the first spark of doubt. Working from home, he noticed Emma's phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. Initially, he tried to ignore it. He trusted his wife completely, but the phone vibrated again and again, curiosity and instinctual fear making him hesitate. But something deep within him gave in, and with a trembling hand, he picked up the phone and read the incoming text messages. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. I can't believe we've been sneaking around for so long." He hasn't suspected a thing. Mark's heart stopped. He blinked, unable to comprehend what he was reading. This couldn't be his wife Emma. They had sat together just last night, laughing, holding hands, their eyes meeting with the familiarity and warmth of shared years. Suddenly, the world seemed to tilt, and his entire life flashed before him through this terrible revelation. Desperate to believe it was a mistake, Mark hired a private investigator. In the 2 agonizing weeks that followed, he waited in silence, his mind filled with memories and questions. He watched Emma closely, trying to catch some sign, some slip-up. But she was as sweet and thoughtful as ever, every smile and tender touch a perfect performance. Finally, the investigator returned with findings. The affair was not recent, but had been going on for nearly a year, and with someone Mark knew well. Jason, his closest friend since childhood. Betrayal twisted Mark's heart deeper with each revealed detail. Emma and Jason had been secretly meeting in hotels, restaurants, and even Jason's apartment, slipping away from Mark's life to indulge in their twisted romance, lying to him while spinning a web of careful deception. Mark felt sick. He wanted answers, wanted Emma to tell him why, to look him in the eyes and admit her betrayal. That night, he confronted her, ready for denial, anger, or anything. Instead, Emma just laughed, a sound so cold and unrecognizable that Mark felt the ground move beneath him. She didn't apologize or try to explain, but looked at him with a pitying gaze, her voice filled with cruel amusement. "Oh, Mark," she said, her tone venomous, "did you really think I was ever happy? Those years I was content being your little wife. I was just bored. You were too predictable. Jason, at least, was exciting, dangerous. He knew how to make things interesting. Not like you and your dull little routines." Her words weighed heavily on him, each one striking his heart. The woman he had given his love to so freely, the woman for whom he had dedicated himself, had never existed. She was a mirage, a shadow, a lie. In the days that followed, Mark tried to salvage what he could, reaching out to friends and family. But wherever he turned, he found her influence, her quiet and insidious manipulation. She had spun a different version of events to everyone, painting him as neglectful, indifferent, and even cruel. She was the victim who had tried her best, but was driven to infidelity by a heartless husband. As the divorce proceedings began, Emma demanded everything: the house, the car, even their joint savings. She had weaponized his love for her to gradually dismantle his life. Each time he thought she couldn't hurt him more, she twisted the knife deeper. Her innocent facade concealed her true nature, blinding those who might have seen through her lies. By the end, Mark had almost lost everything: his home, his dignity, even his reputation. And Emma continued on to marry Jason, flaunting her new life without a hint of remorse. She had successfully rewritten their history, casting herself as the hero in a tragic tale, while Mark became the villain in her carefully woven narrative. To this day, the people of Aspen Hills still see Emma as a symbol of resilience, a woman who overcame a loveless marriage and found happiness. And Mark, he was but a ghost, a whisper, a man who saw the truth too late. As months turned into years, Mark's life further unraveled. Emma and Jason now lived in the house Mark had once called a sanctuary, hosting lavish parties, entertaining their circle of friends, many of whom had once been his. To them, Emma was radiant, glowing with the happiness she claimed to have been long denied. Jason, smug and comfortable in his new, improved role as husband, played the part of her loyal partner. The more Mark tried to move on, the more he found himself haunted by her ruthless betrayal. One evening, Mark found himself standing outside a familiar place, a high-end restaurant where Emma and Jason were hosting a fundraising event. He hadn't intended to come here. His steps had simply led him to this place, as if some invisible force had driven him to witness the life he had lost, the life she had stolen. Laughter spilled out like music, underscored by the clink of glasses and the buzz of socialites. He watched her through the window, her smile brilliant, her laughter like a song. She wore the necklace he had once given her, a glittering diamond pendant, which she now openly flaunted as if to mock him. Mark's hands clenched into fists. The memory of the night he had given her the necklace, her whispered promises of forever, felt like a cruel joke. But as he watched her now, he noticed something else, something that sent a chill down his spine. There was something in her gaze, a hollow glimmer beneath the surface charm. Jason, once so confident by her side, now looked tense, as if an invisible burden weighed upon him. Mark could tell that Jason was beginning to see the cracks that Mark had missed for years. As the following weeks passed, whispers reached him, stories from the town's rumor mill that Emma's charm was beginning to thin. Jason, once attracted by her beauty and the thrill of deception, now found himself on the receiving end of her coldness. Small public arguments escalated into heated confrontations at parties, and the sympathetic glances they had once received from friends turned into uncomfortable stares. But Emma was cunning and resourceful, just as she had been with Mark, and she once again painted herself as the victim, manipulating Jason into believing that every argument was his fault, every tense moment somehow due to his inadequacy. Friends quickly comforted her, consoling her for the struggles she faced in her marriage. But behind closed doors, Jason began to see the monster lurking beneath her charm. Then came the accident. On a rainy night, Jason was driving alone, skidding on the slick road, desperately trying to escape the suffocating tension that had become his life with Emma. When his car slid off the road and plunged into a ditch, he survived but was bedridden for months with severe injuries. For Jason, it was a revelation, a moment of clarity. As he lay there unable to escape Emma's careful watch, now vulnerable, he could see her true nature with terrible clarity. She was ruthless in her control, dictating his every move, even monitoring his phone calls and emails under the guise of caring for him. One night, as Jason lay in bed, Emma's gaze fell upon him, her smile soft, almost sweet, but her eyes holding the same hollow glimmer that Mark had seen so long ago. In that moment, Jason realized he was trapped, ensnared in the same web that had once entangled Mark. Mark, watching from afar, silently witnessed the unraveling of Emma's dark handiwork, yet another life. As time passed, rumors once again circulated around town. Friends who had once sympathized began to distance themselves from Emma. She became eccentric, paranoid, her control over Jason tightening as she sensed his growing distrust. Soon, she attended charity events and neighborhood gatherings alone, forced to play the role of the perfect wife in a facade that no one was willing to support. One night, Mark received an unexpected text message from Jason, a simple sentence conveying a wealth of information. "I know what she is now. I should have seen it sooner." Mark stared at the message for a long time, feeling a strange sense of empty satisfaction. He did not respond, did not reach out, did not need to. Jason was exactly where he had been, trapped in the same nightmare that had almost destroyed him. Emma's world unraveled faster than Mark had anticipated. After Jason left, she desperately tried to cling to her former status. She still attended charity events and neighborhood gatherings, her once charming smile now tense and brittle. People noticed the subtle changes, the ghostly look in her eyes, her desperate touches to their arms lingering too long, her laughter too loud, as if trying to grasp at the acceptance that was slipping away. But the town's sympathy had evaporated, and even her closest friends began to question her stories, the whispered complaints she used to deflect blame from her failed marriage. Her once beguiling charm now brittle, her attempts to win back their loyalty too obvious. Then came the break-in. In the dead of night, as Emma was awakened by footsteps echoing through her now empty house, she froze, listening. It was an undeniable sound, heavy and deliberate, like someone walking with purpose. Heart racing, she reached for her phone, but it wasn't on the bedside table. She cursed, remembering she had left it in the kitchen. Slowly, she rose from the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. Darkness seemed to stretch around her, swallowing her whole, every shadow in the house a threat. "Hello," she whispered, barely audible. There was no response, and she moved into the hallway, her breathing shallow, her ears straining for the slightest sound. Her mind raced through a list of people who might want to harm her. Jason, no. He was too weak, lacked the courage to confront her. A so-called friend trying to frighten her. Possible. Or Mark, the thought chilled her. She pushed it away. Mark was too broken, too pathetic to do something so bold. The footsteps stopped and Emma froze. She could feel someone watching her, could sense their presence just beyond her line of sight, lurking in the shadows of the hall. She wanted to call out again, to scream, but something told her that silence was her only ally. She moved slowly, edging towards the kitchen. Just a few more steps and she could reach her phone, call for help. Then she heard the voice, a whisper, soft and sinister, right by her ear. "How does it feel, Emma?" She spun around, her heart pounding, but saw nothing. The darkness swirled around her, empty and silent. "Who's there?" she hissed, her voice trembling, though she tried her best to sound challenging. There was no response, only silence and the echo of her heartbeat in her ears. She edged backward, reaching for the phone on the kitchen counter. She found it at last, unlocked it. But her fingers were shaking so badly that she accidentally opened the camera app instead of the dial pad. In the faint glow of the screen, she caught a glimpse of her own shadow, and then something else, a face, only there for a moment, almost just a shadow behind her own, but she recognized it instantly. Mark's dark, hollow eyes stared back at her, filled with a strange, terrifying calmness. Emma screamed, the phone falling to the floor, the screen shattering on the tile. "Dear Emma," the voice echoed again, closer this time, almost playful. "Are you scared?" Her heart raced, her vision blurring with panic. She tried to pull herself together, to shake off the fear, but something deep inside had snapped. She had seen him, she was sure of it. But Mark wouldn't do this. He didn't have the capacity for something so calculated, so cruel, did he? Emma ran to the front door, her mind screaming at her to get out, to escape. But as her fingers touched the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. She pulled, but it was stuck, locked tight. She next tried the windows, finding them all shut, locked like cages, trapping her inside. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, a familiar voice from her shattered phone on the floor. It was Mark's voice, and he said gently, with something she had never heard before in his tone, a quiet, brewing satisfaction. "You used to tell me that I couldn't survive without you, that I was too weak, too simple." She backed away from the phone as if it were a venomous creature, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "You thought I didn't have the courage to stand up to you, that I was nothing without you." He continued, his voice deep and steady. "I think you were wrong, weren't I?" Mark laughed, the sound echoing through the house as if he were everywhere. Emma felt a prickling on her skin, goosebumps rising along her arms. "You were so good at lying, Emma," he whispered. "You could always twist the truth, set people against each other. But what happens when you're the one left in the dark? When no one believes you?" Emma crouched on the floor, hands over her head, desperately trying to drown out the voice that seemed to come from every corner of the house. She screamed for him to stop, but Mark just laughed, his sense of amusement growing. "Oh, Emma," he said softly, "you took everything from me." But the phone fell silent. Emma sat there, stiff with fear, waiting for something, anything, but the silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until all she could hear was the beating of her own heart. Then, from some deep part of the house, she heard a soft, chilling echo, her own voice repeating his words. "You took everything from me, but you forgot one thing." A chill ran down her spine as the words grew louder, seeping through the walls as if the house itself was whispering, her own voice twisted, mocking, relentlessly surrounding her, getting louder and louder until she could hear nothing else, drowning out her own thoughts, enveloping her, trapping her in her own design. Days later, neighbors noticed that it had been a while since they had seen Emma. Her curtains were drawn, her car hadn't moved. The once lively house was now shrouded in silence. When they finally broke in, they found her huddled in the dark, muttering to herself incoherently. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, lost in a nightmare only she could see. The Emma they knew, the woman who had once charmed and manipulated so many, was gone, reduced to a shell of herself, trapped in a darkness no one could understand. As they took her away, neighbors whispered about Mark, who had long since vanished from Aspen Hills, leaving only whispers behind. Some said he had left the country, others that he had disappeared completely. But no one really knew. All that was left were the echoes Emma claimed to hear, the whispers that would haunt her when she was alone. As Emma sat alone in her private room in the psychiatric hospital, the walls closing in on her, she realized she was utterly alone. The last thread of her sanity was slipping away, each day blurring into the next, every night filled with whispers and laughter she could never escape. But this night was different. She felt his presence before she saw him. The air seemed colder, heavier, and in that silence she felt a familiar suffocating calm. The door to her room creaked open, and there he stood, Mark, silhouetted by the dim light of the hallway. His expression was unreadable. He was different now. The once mild-mannered man she had seen as weak and predictable now appeared as a hardened, tense shadow of his former self. His gaze was unsettlingly calm, and something in his eyes told her that he had planned this moment down to the last detail. Emma's breath caught in her throat, a chill running down her spine. She was trapped somewhere no one would listen, somewhere her protests would be dismissed as the ramblings of a broken mind. Mark was here, he said, closer now, his face a mask of composed expression. Her heart raced, and she realized she was no longer in control. In all the years she had known him, she had never seen this look in his eyes, this quiet, brewing satisfaction. "Just came to see," he said gently, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I thought you might want some company. After all, you've been so lonely here, haven't you, Emma?" Her mouth went dry, and she tried to summon her usual defiance. The charm and manipulation she wielded like a weapon, but nothing came. She was stripped bare, vulnerable, exposed in a situation she had never known before. What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark tilted his head, eyes narrowing, regarding her with a dark amusement. "What do I want?" he echoed. "I want you to understand, Emma, to feel what I felt. You took everything from me, made sure I had no one to turn to. You were so proud of yourself, so satisfied, but you never considered one thing, did you?" Emma's hands trembled, her mind racing for a way out, for a thread that could still save her, but Mark just watched her, letting the silence press down, letting her panic grow. "You never thought about what would happen if you lost control," he continued. "You thought you could trap everyone in your web, use them, and discard them when you were done. But what happens when you're the one discarded? When you're the one alone, helpless, trapped in the prison you tried to build for others?" Emma's thoughts spun, searching for anything that could give her the upper hand again. She managed a weak smile, eyes narrowing. "You don't have the courage, Mark. I know you. You can't do anything. You're too weak." Mark's expression didn't change, his calm only increasing, the faintest cold smile touching his lips. "Perhaps that's what you think. Perhaps that's what everyone thinks. But you forgot that the weak survive in ways you never expected." He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Unlike you, I don't need an audience to ensure your suffering." Emma felt her stomach drop. He had planned everything, every betrayal, every rumor, every lost friend. She was isolated, cut off from the world. So focused on herself, so sure of her control, that she hadn't seen him slip into the shadows, pulling every string, dismantling her life with quiet satisfaction. He opened a folder he had been holding, and her eyes widened as she recognized the contents. Photos, records, details, evidence she thought she had hidden, every lie she had woven, every secret she thought she had buried. Some even she herself had forgotten. They were all there, spread out like an indictment against her. The life she had built was in ruins. "I spent the last year building a case, Emma," he said gently. "I made sure no one else would listen to you, so when you finally broke, no one would believe a word you said. Every lie you've told, every secret you thought you'd hidden, I've made sure everyone knows, quietly, subtly, until you've become exactly the person you tried to make me, a discarded ghost." She opened her mouth, but no words came. The enormity was sinking in, knowing her reputation was shattered beyond repair, and Mark, he was walking away from it all, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life no one would remember. "So this is my final gift to you," he said, his voice dropping to a deep, almost tender tone. "I am leaving here forever, never to return to this town, but you, Emma, will stay here, locked in this room, talking to the walls, repeating your lies until even you can't remember what's real." With that, he turned to leave, pausing only for a moment at the door to look back one last time at the woman who had once held his heart and torn it apart with ruthless efficiency. "Goodbye, Emma," he said, his voice calm and resolute. "Enjoy the silence. You will have a long time to get used to it." He closed the door gently behind him, leaving her in that sterile, silent room that would be her home for the rest of her life. As she stared at the closed door, the weight of his revenge settled upon her, the reality of her life collapsing with terrible clarity. She was truly alone, surrounded by the ghosts of the lies she had woven, the echoes of a life she could never reclaim whispering in her ears.